There aren't many trains that actually look pleased to see you, but for more than 2 decades, passengers travelling from London King's Cross were greeted by a train with what appeared to be an enormous smile on its face. This was the British Rail Class 365 Networker Express, affectionately known to railway enthusiasts as the Happy Train. But behind that cheerful face is a fascinating story involving British Rail's Networker programme, high-speed commuter services, a temporary adventure in Scotland, tragedy at Potter's Bar, and, ultimately, a surprisingly early retirement. So why was the Class 365 built? What made it special? And what happened to Britain's happy trains? Let's find out. The story begins in the late 1980s and early 1990s when British Rail was developing a new generation of electric trains under the Networker programme. Many trains operating around London were getting old, and British Rail wanted modern replacements offering better acceleration, improved reliability, and greater passenger comfort. The Networker family eventually included the classes 465 and 466, but British Rail also wanted a train capable of working longer distance, outer suburban services. The result was the Class 365 Networker Express. 41 four-car units were built at ABB's York Works during 1994 and 1995, becoming the final trains constructed at the historic Holgate Road Works before it closed. The Class 365 had a maximum speed of 100 miles per hour, making it considerably more capable than a simple suburban commuter train. The fleet was initially divided between two areas. 16 units went south of London for services in Kent, while 25 headed north to work Great Northern services. And it was on the Great Northern route that the Class 365 would really make its name. From 1996, the trains became familiar sights running from London King's Cross towards Cambridge, Peterborough, and King's Lynn. With their 100 mile per hour capability, they were ideal for fast outer suburban services on the East Coast Main Line. Thousands of commuters travelled aboard them every day, and they even occasionally carried Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip when the royal family travelled by train towards Sandringham. Not bad for a commuter train, but there's one thing we haven't discussed yet. Why exactly were they called the Happy Trains? Interestingly, they didn't originally have their famous smile. Modifications were later made to install cab air conditioning, which required changes to the front of the train. The resulting design included a large curved panel beneath the cab windows, and once you noticed it, you couldn't possibly unsee it. The Class 365 looked like it was smiling. Enthusiasts quickly nicknamed them the Happy Trains, and perhaps British Rail accidentally discovered something the railway industry has struggled with ever since: how to make a commuter train look genuinely delighted to be at work. During railway privatisation, the Class 365 fleet passed through several operators. The Great Northern units worked with West Anglia, Great Northern, then first Capital Connect and eventually Great Northern under Govia Thameslink Railway. Meanwhile, the 16 trains originally operating in Kent were eventually transferred north and converted for overhead electrical operation, bringing almost the entire surviving fleet together. The Class 365s became dependable workhorses. They weren't glamorous intercity trains, and they weren't technological superstars, and they simply spent year after year moving huge numbers of passengers between London and towns across eastern England. Unfortunately, the history of the Class 365 also contains tragedy. On the 10th of May 2002, Unit 365 526 was operating a King's Cross to King's Lynn service when it derailed while travelling through Potter's Bar. The train was travelling at approximately 97 miles per hour when it passed over a set of points just south of the station. The rear vehicles derailed, with the final carriage becoming detached and crashing into the station area. 7 people were killed and more than 70 were injured. The investigation found that the derailment had been caused by failures involving the installation, maintenance and inspection of the points rather than a fundamental defect with the Class 365 itself. The damaged unit never returned to passenger service. There were other incidents involving Class 365s during their careers, including collisions at level crossings and a low-speed collision between 2 units at Cambridge in 2015, but overall the fleet accumulated millions of miles of intensive passenger service. By the late 2000s and 10s, however, their future was becoming uncertain. Newer trains, including the Class 387, began replacing them on Great Northern services. But then the happy trains received an unexpected temporary reprieve. In 2018, 10 Class 365s were sent north to Scotland. ScotRail needed additional trains while introduction of its new Class 385 fleet was delayed, and the 365s provided a temporary solution. Suddenly, trains normally associated with King's Cross and Cambridge were appearing on services around Edinburgh, Glasgow and Stirling. It was quite a change of scenery. 1 minute you're carrying commuters through Hertfordshire, the next you're heading towards Edinburgh with a slightly confused smile still plastered across your face. Once the Class 385s entered service, however, the borrowed 365s were no longer required and their Scottish adventure came to an end. Back on Great Northern, the remaining Class 365s gradually became less important as newer trains took over their duties. And finally, in May 2021, their passenger career came to an end. On the evening of the 14th of May, enthusiasts gathered at King's Cross to watch the final Class 365 passenger service. The 1812 departure to Peterborough was formed of 12 coaches and carried a special Network Southeast Networker Express headboard. After around 25 years of service, the happy train had made its final regular journey. Unfortunately, there wasn't going to be another operator waiting to give the fleet a new home. Most Class 365s were subsequently sent for scrap. Today, there are no complete Class 365 trains operating on Britain's national railway network. 3 vehicles have survived at the East Kent Railway, but sadly no complete Class 365 was preserved. And that's perhaps the saddest part of the story. These trains weren't particularly old when they disappeared. Many were only around 25 years old, considerably younger than some trains that were still operating elsewhere on Britain's railways. But their legacy is surprisingly strong. The Class 365 represented the final years of British rail train development. They were part of the ambitious Networker programme. They were the final trains built at York's historic Holgate Road works, and they provided decades of dependable commuter service. They worked in Kent. They became synonymous with the Great Northern Route. They temporarily rescued services in Scotland. They carried millions of commuters. They even carried the Queen. But perhaps most importantly, they had something that many modern trains struggle to achieve: personality. You could recognise a Class 365 immediately. That enormous smiling front gave them a strangely friendly appearance, almost as though the train was genuinely delighted to be taking you to work, which, frankly, was probably more enthusiasm than most passengers had at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. The Class 365 may have disappeared from Britain's mainline railway, but for railway enthusiasts and the thousands of passengers who travelled aboard them, the happy train certainly hasn't been forgotten. If you've ever travelled aboard a Class 365, we'd love to hear your memories in the comments below. Were you a regular Great Northern commuter? Did you travel aboard one during their Scottish adventure, or perhaps you remember them operating in Kent? And if you've enjoyed this look back at Britain's happy trains, please like, share and subscribe to Trains, Trains, Trains for more railway history, fascinating stories and driver's eye journeys from Britain's railways. Thanks very much for watching, and until next time, keep watching the rails, and we'll see you in the next video.